Three mistakes that led to my pet business burnout and how to avoid it for you. I'm going to go over the mistakes right now, and then I'll go in depth to each one and offer a potential solution for you to consider after that. So, mistake number one was I made other people's urgency my own. Number two is I didn't schedule or honor time for me to work on the business. And number three is I didn't have any good boundaries and I was too accessible. So now I want to deep dive into each one of these examples by sharing my screen and getting into it. Making other people's urgency my own. Um, this can look like, you working on something and then an email comes through and you get an alert or a text message an alert or a direct message an alert and then you drop whatever it was that you were doing and then you respond to this inquiry or whatnot. Okay, so a specific example comes to mind where we provide in the dog training business weekly homework that gets automated and automatically sent to our registration participants. Now, sometimes people, don't check their spam filter. So I have been many times disrupted by, an email coming through and then me like responding to it, which, might take me a total of 5 to 7 minutes of distraction from what I was doing. Not that it takes that much time to send that message, but that adds up to numerous times per day. So what I learned through some difficult tests over and over again was that like I needed to not take on someone else's urgency of they need that thing solved as soon as possible as my own. Especially if you're grooming, you're training, you're doing daycare, etc. People are like, "Oh my gosh, I need help with this right now." And it's like, yeah, fair enough. But oftentimes some people have left it to the last minute. So don't adopt their urgency and drop everything in your life to accommodate them waiting to the last minute. Okay. Because it's been like another example with dog training is I've had people who, had multiple red flags and then all of a sudden their dog bites someone. They're like, we need you here today. And I'm like, I can't make it to you today. I'm too busy. And I'm not willing any longer to drop everything and sacrifice my time with my family and my son, etc., to get to you tonight because you ignored the writing on the wall. Now, I don't say those things, but I have to kind of compartmentalize this to some degree, to make sure that I set my priorities, for myself to maintain my mental health and bandwidth. So, number one, try to not take on other people's urgency. Okay. Time blocking definitely helps with this, where, for instance, you might set aside 20 minutes per day to answer emails instead of letting them come and notify you or messages, etc., whenever people send them. That's, another piece. Communicating clearly, establishing those boundaries by informing others. So that is just simply like, hey, maybe you post, I will respond to inquiries every single day at this time and that time, just as a heads up, because in between those times, I'm working on other things. It's like it won't be that big of a deal. So the second mistake I made, not scheduling or honoring time to work on the business. I actually had a call set up last week with somebody who was working a lot and more than they wanted to necessarily. In times they weren't wanting to. And it really kind of brought this up for me, which was, and they missed our appointment to chat. And they just kind of alluded, and it is what it is. But what I really was concerned with and am concerned with for them, because I've lived it, is like, they're running, burning the candle at both ends. And with burning the candle at both ends, what can happen is you can't see where you're traveling necessarily. And that's where sometimes having an outside perspective to help you potentially recognize there is costs, figurative and literal, to everything we do. So, you taking on a dog on an evening where you're off with your children or a weekend or whenever your time is for your business to work on it or yourself and your family to recharge, yeah, you're going to maybe earn some income. But what I'd be looking at is, well, what's the figurative cost by me taking that either to my own health and wellness or my family and connection? Because sometimes if you put it in those terms, the extra $50, might not be worth it. And you're like, you know what? This is going to set me back quite a bit if I take this afternoon instead of being with my family and kind of rebuilding and reconnecting with them to make, an extra $100 or $200. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and you got to make ends meet. So there is that too. But we'll set that aside for the time being. So prioritizing your time. What I mean by that is, try to, even if it's half an hour per week, everyone has half an hour, no matter what anyone says. If they don't have half an hour per week, it's because they are too busy probably making one of these mistakes. And I've been there. So it's not a judgment, but like realistically, absolutely everyone has half an hour and even more than that per week that they could allocate to working on their business. And working on the business just might mean to that person, especially if they're in burnout, that could be, taking an hour to yourself to go get a massage. It's not technically working on the business, but you're working on yourself to fill your cup. And during that massage, you might like kind of drift off and be like, oh my gosh, I haven't had time to calm down and relax. And they're like, hey, actually, it might save myself a lot of time if I got people to book themselves instead of me manually writing it into a notebook every time that they call. And I just send them the link, for instance. Learning to delegate too can be an example of that. But like, there's so many different ways I could go with each one of these points, depending on the business, whether it's a groomer, a trainer, a pet sitter, etc. So I just want to give some general premises. But if you've ever felt like, you don't schedule time for yourself or you don't honor it, um, you know, you're not alone. One of the most common problems is sometimes I would schedule things, but then I would let other people's urgency take over my time on the business. So typically what I do in those circumstances is I'll try to like remove distractions if possible. That could mean putting my phone in another room, closing out my notifications on my computer, and I'm just going to work specifically on that task I really would like to get done that is going to proactively and help me progress in my business. Third mistake I personally made, and some of you may have too, is no boundaries or not enough of them and being too accessible. So, a really good example that comes to mind for me is, working as a professional dog trainer, having a lot of clients on the go. It's not uncommon, and I've told people, hey, reach out to me anytime you have a question. Well, I would probably supersede that with you if you were going to do this in for as like mention them to email you with their questions and that you'll get back to them within a 48-hour term. That can stop from you getting pinged when you're trying to like, calm down or relax with your family or get distracted. Because as soon as those things come in, for me, especially as someone who like worked, and everyone is, I'm sure, in the same circumstance, worked your butt off to get where you are. You want to maintain that with a death grip, right? You don't want to lose the traction you've worked so hard to get. So we feel compelled to respond to people as quickly as possible because in the past we might have lost clients for it or clients hadn't been as satisfied. But once you get to a certain point in the business, we have to actually change how we operate because what got us to that point isn't going to get us to either stay at that point or get to the next point. We'll have to upgrade how we show up as a person in business. So, you're not going to grind your way into, balance or the next level. I've tried it, didn't work. I did grind myself into burnout successfully, but luckily I didn't quit the industry and I got the appropriate help, at that time. And I realized I needed it. So I did it. So, what I started to do was I started recommending and suggesting all my clients send me an email. So then I could set aside 20 minutes and I might not get to all the emails that day, but I have 20 minutes I'm going to carve out to respond to email inquiries from existing clients. And that can be a way to set boundaries. Another boundary is if you're like a boarding facility, it's like don't make exceptions for people to pick up their dog at 10 p.m. Like, no. I mean, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it because that adds up day after day, year after year. Because in some of these circumstances, you know, um, you might feel taken advantage of. And, but if you keep saying yes, it's not necessarily your client's fault, right? You could say no, and they're like, oh, they could say no. So if they obviously don't mind, but then like internally, I might be starting to resent them. And I don't want that kind of a relationship. So my preference is, hey, I'm going to just proactively be like, this is my boundary. Maybe there's exceptions here and there for extenuating circumstances to break that boundary. But generally speaking, I do this then, and you can pick up your dog here, and this is the cost of service. Okay. So the last piece I would kind of go into would be both burnout and boundaries are uncomfortable. One keeps you stuck and the other sets you free. Because one of the things I noticed, and this is where I personally needed a lot of help, I could, do a pretty good job of identifying, hey, this is probably not that good for me. I remember exactly a moment in time where I took a phone call after hours because someone was like, oh my gosh, I really need your help. Can you call me back as soon as possible? And it was like after 5 p.m. and I was with my son. And these nights, like I work later than that oftentimes, but at this time, on these certain nights with my son, I didn't work past 5 p.m. And here I am on the phone at 5:20, and the person essentially wants me to take their dogs and just like kind of fix their problem, but like take their dogs and rehome them. Like, could you, fix this? And I'm on the phone like, like, kind of like they're telling me their life story and their dogs and about how they got to where they are. And like none of it has anything to do with me. I've never spoken to these people before. And I am like, oh my gosh, I am sacrificing like 30 minutes here on this phone with these people that are burying their souls to me about their problems with their two, I think it was poodles, if I remember correctly. And I'm like, this isn't what I do. I help keep dogs in homes. I don't help like rehome dogs. Now I have done that and like, assisted with that, but not with someone just right off the street that I didn't know anything about. But the premise was like in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, like I am resenting this person. And they were in a tough spot. And it wasn't my fault, but I also didn't have to take that on like it was my responsibility to remedy that situation. So, that was a really good learning moment for me. It's like, no, even if they're like, oh my gosh, I really need to talk to you. Like I have to set those boundaries for my own family because like I wouldn't have been able to do anything that evening anyways. So I could have easily just contacted them the next day. And that was a good, it was a tough learning experience to me because I was really frustrated. And I mean, I wasn't, inconsiderate or rude to the person, but I was just like, oh my gosh, like I could hear my son playing outside of the room, and I'm on this call with this person that's never ending. And at the time, I didn't necessarily have the skills to lightly, end the call and politely. So I just kind of let them go off on a tangent. So, if any of this hits home for you and you might want some assistance with, well, how do I navigate step by step doing these kinds of things? Just comment me or shoot me a message and I can see if I might be able to help you. But at the end of the day, like I said, to keep it simple, choose one of these three mistakes. Okay. Let's just pretend it's boundaries. This is all kind of boundaries, really, all three of them. But let's say you choose one boundary of one of the biggest things that is, frustrating you, taking time away from your family, causing you discomfort or frustration, and you honor to yourself that you're not going to do that thing anymore. Let's say if you're a groomer, you're not working past 7 p.m., or let's say you're a boarding facility, you're not going to, meet someone at 9 p.m. because they got home early from their trip and let them give them their dog back, even though they're supposed to be staying to the following day. Just choose something that is a major frustration for you because either way, it's going to be uncomfortable. But the benefit of the boundary discomfort is very short lived. And then it goes away. And then all of a sudden, you're like, wow, that was a lot easier than I would have expected. So I hope this resonates on some level and you can learn from some of my missteps. But, otherwise, all the best.